Hey everybody, Lieutenant Joe here. Well, we're only a few hours away from the Christmas holiday. And then, of course, we have the New Year's holiday. There's Kwanzaa. There's lots of different holidays in December. We're just finishing up with Hanukkah. And I guess the point I wanted to make is that when I first started my career in law enforcement, I started out as a patrol officer. Now, when you start out on the department, of course, you start out at the bottom of the totem pole. You work nights, you work weekends, you work holidays, you work every possible thing that needs to be covered. Senior people get the good holidays off. You work towards that. That's part of the paying your dues in law enforcement. And I remember the first couple of Christmas Eves that I worked. I had been working 3 to 11 shift, and I had to leave my family and I had to drive probably about a half an hour away to the department where I worked and the community where I worked. And it was interesting. We had our evening briefing, and we're all sitting around having a cup of coffee, and the sergeant's giving us all the information we need for the shift, and we're getting ready to go out. Well, most of the officers in my department, they lived in town. I would say probably 25% of us did not live in town. Everyone else did. And there was kind of an unwritten rule that if you lived in town during your meal break, you could, run home and see your family and have dinner with everybody. And that stretched out sometimes. If there was not a lot of calls for service, the Sarge didn't mind if you stayed a little bit longer with your family and enjoyed the holiday. For all of us out of towners, it was a little more difficult because we didn't have our families there with us. I didn't have my wife and my children. Um, and it was I don't want to say lonely was the word, but you certainly could feel it as you rode around town. Now, 3 to 11 shift, it starts getting dark around 4:30 on Christmas. By 5 o'clock, it's dark, and then you're floating around and you hear everybody starting to head home for dinner. They're doing their things and the Christmas lights all start coming on. It's a beautiful scene, but I have to tell you, it was difficult missing my family. I had young kids, and to not be able to go home was a different kind of experience, right? Because through my whole life prior to that, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, you were off, right? Because my jobs weren't those kind of jobs that you work shift work around the clock. And I remember this one particular Christmas Eve, I was driving down a side street, just doing evening patrol, looking at the neighborhood and, looking at the lights and making sure everybody was good and doing the right thing and didn't need help, right? And there was a lot of parties going on. You could see there was quite a few parties going on. And it was fun to see, all the little children were excited and they were running up to the house with some of them had, the little Christmas pajamas on, and other kids were dressed up, really nice to go see grandma, grandpa, or aunts and uncles, whatever, carrying packages. You could just feel the energy of Christmas Eve. And that was nice. But I remember this one particular house as I was coming up the road, a regular size house. It wasn't a gigantic place. It was a regular size house. And there were quite a few people going up the walkway, heading to the front door. And the people that I guess lived in the house, they opened the front door and there was a lot of hugging going on and laughing and giggling. And it was really wonderful. It was a beautiful scene of Americana at Christmas. And I remember as I'm driving by and I'm looking at all this, it must have been the homeowner. Man was standing there and he looked out and he saw my patrol car and he just gave me a wave. Hey officer, how are you? And I said, hey, how are you? I rolled my window. I said, Merry Christmas. He goes, Merry Christmas to you too. And I drove on by and I continued my patrols. Well, I'm going to say probably an hour and a half later, I worked my way back and I tried to do random patrols like they tell us. You don't set up a pattern. And I'm zipping in and I'm zipping out and going through the thing. And I happen to be going past that same area. And I'm going down that street. And it was interesting because I could look in, you could see they had this big picture window. And I could see inside there. And here was all these people, the Christmas tree, everything was lit up. And it was like out of a Hallmark card, to tell you the truth. It really was. You could see people laughing and joking and having cocktails and, all that kind of stuff. But as I was passing the house, I saw there was a couple people standing on the porch, kind of like just standing under the light of the Christmas tree. And guess what? It was the homeowner and one of his friends. They were enjoying a nice cigar. And I pulled up and I waved, and the guy waves at me and he's like, "Hey, stop, stop." And I stopped. I said, "Yeah, what's up? Everything all right?" He goes, "Yeah." And he comes down, him and his friend, and he said, "Hey, just want to wish you a Merry Christmas. Thank you for being out here, protecting our neighborhood instead of being with your family. That must be hard." I said, "Well, it is. It's a little uncomfortable, but you know what? It's part of the job, so I'm good with it. I'm glad everyone in there is having a good time." He was very nice, shook my hand, and he goes, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you swing on in and get something to eat? We have plenty of food in here. Why don't you swing on in and get something to eat, get a cup of coffee or something?" And I'm sure all the kids would love to see next to Santa Claus, they'd like to see a policeman. And I said, "Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that." And I said, "I don't know if that's the right thing to do. Should I do it, not do it?" And I thanked him and I just kind of moved on. I didn't know if I was supposed to go into somebody's house and have something. You're trying to figure out all the rules and be ethical and all that kind of thing. It was a very, very nice gesture, though, by this family. And I remembered as I drove away, as I drove out of sight, as I drove away, I remember seeing them go back into the house. And while it was lonely to not be with my family, that little gesture from that man and his friend made me feel comfortable, made me feel appreciated, made me feel the beauty and love of Christmas Eve. So I guess that's really what I wanted to say is that remember, when you see first responders working on the holidays, say hello. Tell them you appreciate what they're doing. It goes a long, long way. So listen, everybody out there, you have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and enjoy your family and friends. All right, this is Lieutenant Joe saying, hey, have a great day.